Now, truth, honesty, and transparency is at the heart of any credible election. And that's why, as part of our election series here on Elections on Kaya, we thought we should take a moment to hone in on how we're doing when it comes to curbing misinformation and disinformation in South Africa in the lead up to our polls come the 29th of May. I can't think of a better organization to help us worm through some of what is true and what isn't than Africa Check. And joining us now is a researcher with the organization, Keegan Leach, who's with us for a sense of how we're doing so far and, of course, ways in which we could improve. Keegan, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for popping by at Kaya House and for having this conversation with us.
Thanks very much for hosting us.
We have a conversation about misinformation, I think, every year, and rightfully so, because it's such an integral part of what it takes to run a credible election. As a start, how do you reckon we're doing as a country so far? As you and I speak, there's just over 60 days to the election, so it's really getting to crunch time, which means there could be a whole lot of information being passed around.
Absolutely, and there is. And I would say that we're doing pretty well because, there hasn't been anything disastrous or anything terrible.
Yeah.
But part of what our job as Africa Check is not just looking out for alarming, dramatic misinformation that, could derail the election, but even sort of smaller, more everyday things that we are going to need to rely on, even if everything goes as planned. Things like, what are political parties saying? Do people have an understanding of what's in their manifestos? Is that correct? Those sorts of things that are sort of really foundational to how an election works.
Yeah, you speak about disasters or derailing an election. Perhaps you can speak to us about the kind of spectrum of issues that you guys look out for with examples, if you know what I mean. So what counts as a major disinformation or misinformation incident, and what would you reckon is not minor but still worth noting?
Well, maybe let's talk about the difference between dis and misinformation,
Sure.
because not a lot of people understand, and it's not super important, but the difference is about intent. Disinformation is something that's deliberate, that someone wants to mislead. Misinformation is someone who has themselves misunderstood something or been misled and passes on false information without knowing that it's false. And both of those can have great impacts. But at the sort of extreme end of the impacts of these might be something like someone sharing targeted disinformation in order to achieve some aim, like swaying an election or provoking violence or something like that. And then on the end of the spectrum that we often think of as more harmless is stuff like slightly misquoted figures or things that are slightly misleading because someone who is sharing something on maybe just misunderstood what they were reading and didn't read it twice, something like that, that might have a big impact down the line, like, sharing something that you haven't fully understood might still change who you are going to vote for, or what decisions you're going to make about health cures or food to buy at the grocery store or something like that. But even those small things that are less likely to make news headlines as a big disinformation event are still important, because everyday decisions, things like what to buy at the grocery store, who to vote for, and what health cures to take, really have an impact when they build up.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm wondering, as you're speaking, what we could do to try and improve our systems, because this election is different for a whole host of reasons, right? We have a whole lot more people contesting, there are independents who are thrown into the mix, so it feels like there are a whole lot more moving parts. How is Africa Check hoping to keep up with all of that?
Well, we're hoping to get a little bit more impact this election. We've started an election coalition with other media agencies, and we're hoping that we can provide assistance to them in their reporting. We can help provide some fact-checking help and training, and that they can get in touch with us easier and republish our work and things like that, so that it spreads a little bit further, because it's no use if we debunk something and that debunk just never goes anywhere. It never reaches an audience. So one of the things that we're trying to do to sort of really have an effect this election is to try and make sure that our work gets shared. And that's part of the reason we're here today.
Indeed. Happy to help. How is that faring?
It's going well so far.
I suppose so. But on a much more serious note, though, I mean, I can imagine a situation where someone who is, I don't know, for lack of a better term, found guilty of spreading inaccuracies continues doing so because they feel there isn't any kind of punitive action that's taken against them. Is there something like that exists? I mean, if we know of sects of society that are intentionally trying to mislead the public, how do you hold them accountable?
Well, we don't focus on whether there should be legal ramifications or something like that for sharing dis or misinformation. But we do encourage people to be very wary of the source of their information. And something like someone being a known source of dis or misinformation is a good indicator that even if they sometimes get it right, a broken clock is right twice a day, they shouldn't be trusted as a source for news or information, breaking news, things like that. And so one of the things that we try and stress is to get your news from credible sources and to check where information is coming from. If someone sends you something on WhatsApp or shares it on Twitter or something like that, make sure that you know who actually published that and compare what they're saying to what credible sources are saying.
Yeah.
A common thing in an election year is someone might say that, there's violence at this polling station or there's X, Y, and Z happening, some big dramatic event. If it was a really big deal, you can bet that it wouldn't be one nameless account on Twitter sharing it. There would be news coverage or there would be multiple sources that you could check to verify that something was really going on.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about Twitter a lot, and I think it's safe to say we've come a long way with how social media can help tell the story and sometimes detract from it. What's your take around just how these technologies and these platforms are coming to the party in helping us verify what is and isn't true?
Well, unfortunately, they aren't sort of the core issue. Misinformation and disinformation have always been around. It is just that social media helps us share all kinds of information quicker. We're hoping that by being on those platforms, we are a little bit of a counteraction to that. But as I said, it's very common that simply just by the nature of how the platform works and the nature of how news is shared, often the debunk doesn't go as far as the original claim. So it's very difficult to ensure that everyone who sees a piece of incorrect information sees the correction as well. And one of the ways that we try and head that off is by teaching people to spot mis and disinformation for themselves. So they break that cycle of sharing the original false claim. And then, like I say, we try and be on the platforms where people are so that they can tag us or send something to us. And if you don't have time to check it out, then we'll do that work for you.
Yeah, and we're very grateful for that. How do people sharpen their intuition around this kind of thing, especially when there is so much information being passed by, as is the case during an election?
It's nice that you use the word intuition because very often there's no definitive way to tell, but there's a lot of things that can set off a red flag. So strong emotions in a claim is one red flag that you should look for. If something makes you feel scared or angry or even excited by something, then those emotions help misinformation spread because it's very easy to say, okay, well, I don't know if this is true, but I'm going to share this because I'm worried and my family needs to see it. And it often gets us to skip the step where we would usually pause and say, what's the source and where does this come from? So let those strong emotions be a bit of a red flag. As I've already mentioned, always check out the source. Know where something's coming from. And if you don't know the source, then you need to check with other sources to find someone that you trust and that you know is credible, who can either confirm that that information is accurate or be an indication that maybe you shouldn't share it on because there's nothing else to back it up. And if it really comes down to it, if you don't trust a message or a piece of information, just be safe and don't share it.
Yeah. And hopefully that restraint comes through in that moment, right? Given the
We'll
emotions around this. And it's such an interesting thing that you touch on, right? Because in many instances, people who are hoping to spread a message, true or not, appeal to your senses almost, right? What you feel, perhaps if you can, what you see in some instances. To what an extent does, let me ask the question this way. What does Africa Check look out for when they try ascertain what might and might not be true in that sense?
Well, there's one thing that really helps is that we've seen a lot of misinformation before. So sometimes we'll even see an old claim that we just recognize. It's been reworded, but we've debunked it a million times in the past. So we have a bit of an advantage there. But we also look out for the same kinds of things that we tell everyone to look out for. At the end of the day, our job is something that can be done by pretty much anyone. Everyone has the skills. It's just that we tend to be the ones who have the time as well.
Right.
And so we also look out for things like strong emotions and claims that play on a particular bias or a particular strong feeling. And we also look out for other things. So we know that if we're checking a political party's manifesto, for example, it's sort of just a basic step to just check that the numbers they're using are accurate. Check if they've used particular definitions or particular phrases, that they're using those in the correct way and not misrepresenting the content of what they're talking about.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing because during these manifesto launches, there's a lot of hyperbole, some people might say, right? Which leads me to my next question, the responsibility that political parties and their leaders have to try and ensure that the truth is out there, nothing else but that. Given what's been said so far, and a lot has been said, how well are the parties doing in telling their constituencies the truth?
Well, it seems like I'm bringing up manifestos often, and it's because that's what we're working on at the moment. If you check out our website, africacheck.org, you'll see that as all the way up until the election, we'll be publishing our, reports on the various manifestos and the manifesto launches to see how well they've been doing. And the key takeaway is really that everyone gets it wrong sometimes. And whether you think that your favorite political party is doing the best they can to get everything right, or whether you think your least favorite party is deliberately misleading the public, everyone gets it wrong. No matter how well-intentioned, people make mistakes and slip up, and there are things that end up being a little bit misleading or out of date or something like that. And our hope is that political parties and their leaders acknowledge this and correct themselves, because part of ensuring everyone has accurate information is publishing corrections when you get something wrong or being clear about when you make mistakes.
Do they often do that though? From your experience at least?
Not often. Yeah. It's rare that we've had public corrections, but it does happen. And so we like to try and encourage that. And then sort of the other end of that, the carrot is that, we'll be very happy to publish corrections and highlight when a party has actually acknowledged where they've got something wrong. The stick is that we are there to hold them accountable when they don't get it right.
Absolutely. And hopefully you'll do that with the help of everybody else. I mean, you've just mentioned that really at the heart of what you do, everybody else can kind of join in. You just have the time to do it. And so how do people flag stuff with Africa Check, typically speaking?
Well, we're on social media. We're at Africa Check on Twitter. We're Africa Check on Facebook. And we're even on WhatsApp, because we know that a lot of people, get their information from other people on WhatsApp, from family members and group chats and things like that. So we have a service called What's Crap on WhatsApp. I think you can find it really easily by going to the URL whatscrap.africa and sign up for it. And you can just send us anything you find, something you see trending online, or a message that gets forwarded to you by a friend, something like that. If you feel like you can't really trust it, but you don't know how to work out whether it's true or not, then that's what we're here to do for you.
Sure. And that's really interesting because stuff that makes the rounds on WhatsApp very rarely trends in the formal sense, right? It's hard to keep up with that. But from your kind of observation so far, are you finding that the misinformation is still living by and large on places like social media? Or are you finding that a lot of private messages through WhatsApp chain texts are also carrying a lot of that?
Well, one of the reasons that we started What's Crap on WhatsApp is that WhatsApp is a closed service.
Right,
It's
there's
not a
encryptions.
public. Yeah.
Right.
So it was impossible for us to tell how much misinformation was being shared on that platform. And it's still very difficult. We still rely on what people send us or what we just happen to see ourselves. So it's difficult to answer that. We haven't done any formal research into trying to work out exactly how misinformation spreads online, or how much of it is on WhatsApp and other closed platforms. But it's certainly the case that there is stuff spreading there, and they also cross-pollinate. Something will jump from WhatsApp to Twitter to Facebook, to TikTok, to anywhere. So it's very likely that if you see something in one place, it's not just spreading there. These sorts of things, because it's so easy to just copy and paste a message, or because it's so easy to forward something on without checking it, it's very often the case that seeing a message somewhere is just the first red flag that it's going to be somewhere else.
No, fair enough. Hopefully the next time we speak, we'll have a better sense of how all of that has fared. But Keegan Leach, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really do appreciate your time as we continue making sense of how best we can protect the integrity of this election, especially when it comes to the threat of mis and disinformation. Thanks as always for keeping up with us here on Elections on Kaya, on the streets and on the air.